The Houston government unveiled today new one-year funding agreements with the province's 10 universities. Among the changes, the bilateral agreements will put a 2% cap on tuition for all Nova Scotia undergrads, compared to 3% in the previous agreement. Aideen Reynolds is chair of the Canadian Federation of Students here in Nova Scotia. So you were at the briefing this morning with government. Can you first of all give me your overall impression of these new agreements?
Yeah, there are things in the agreements that I'm excited about. There are things in the agreements that I'm worried about. I was invited to a meeting this morning with the minister and deputy minister to talk about them. There is a lower cap on the increases in tuition for domestic students, and there's a raise in an increase in government funding. My biggest concern is the mandatory tuition increases for international students. I think that the government has told me time and time again that that they're trying to make the cost of international tuition meet what it actually costs to educate. I don't share that view. I think that international students are as much of our community as anyone else. I think that international students in this country are extremely are put in very difficult situations. And I think that to make a very clear line between domestic and international students has long-term consequences.
Well, it is a minimum increase of 9% for first-year international undergraduate students. That's except for Dal and King's, because they've had an increase in the previous year. Specifically, what kind of impact do you think that increase will have on international students? Will they just not come?
Maybe. I mean, at Dal and King's, international tuition went up by 25% this past year. So that's why they're exempt, because they've gone above and beyond in terms of increasing international differential fees. I think I'm worried about places like CBU, which rely very, very heavily on international students, most of whom are completely unsupported, a large percentage of whom are living in very dangerous, unsafe situations, who don't have access to jobs and don't have access to housing and support and the things that you need to be a person in the world.
Well, what about the 2% cap on tuition for other students versus the previous 3%? Do you see that as a positive?
Yeah, I think that's welcome. I think that that's a genuinely good thing to see. I don't think that increasing tuition at all is ideal, but I'm more than happy to see the cap being lowered for domestic students. Now, we don't know about domestic out-of-province students. I haven't seen any information on that. Currently, domestic out-of-province tuition is completely unregulated, but our institutions usually pair it with domestic in-province tuition. So places like, Quebec have started to increase out-of-province tuition in various ways. So I'm obviously worried about that. There are great benefits to what has been shared, but it's not my job really to talk about the benefits or think about the benefits as much, because they're benefits. They're going to help the students. My primary job is to look for problems and pitfalls, because then I can help student unions support the students that are dealing with the consequences of these agreements.
Well, we were talking about, the housing crisis. It's been a big issue. Now universities in HRM and CBRM will be required to start increasing student housing. How would you describe what it's been like trying to find housing now, and how much more is needed?
Yeah. Finding housing as a student is next to impossible. I'm really lucky to have lived where I live for 3 years, kind of, I think, flying under the radar of my landlord, but most students I know are paying $900, $1,000 a month, living in, not super great apartments with very little oversight. I think that I'm worried especially about schools like NASCAD where they don't have any housing for their students right now. I was told that they are working on an agreement with SMU to talk about, to house NASCAD students at SMU, which is also concerning to me because I think that it's important that for students to be able to like build community and like learn together, if that makes sense. To learn in a completely isolated way has huge effects on like the amount that we're able to take in and the way that we're able to perform. And we saw that during the pandemic, right? People have been very, very isolated. Yeah, I have concerns about the mandated housing. I asked a question about if there was funding for schools who didn't have, adequate housing or didn't meet the requirements that were set out. And I think that the impression that I got was that no, there's no additional funding to build housing where there is none, or to provide housing where there is none. I think that what I'm seeing in a lot of places in this report, especially given the concept release that alleged that concept was not adequately included in the government's decision, we're seeing the government kind of offload a lot of these difficulties onto the schools themselves, and then the schools in turn put a huge burden on our international student population.
All right, well, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.